Hi, Nick. Thank you so much for taking your time for this. I really appreciate it. As we start, can you maybe talk a little bit about your role and your company?
Sure. Yeah, good to be here. So I am the head of security for Baker Tilly, and we are the ninth largest accounting firm in the world. We have about 7,000 professionals and 200 offices, so pretty good operation there.
Awesome. And what is within your purview?
Yeah, so I'm responsible for all of internal security and risk. So I am responsible for security from the top to bottom, so workstations to servers to policies, procedures, the GRC side of the house with the governance, risk, and compliance. All compliance efforts are driven through my team, so SOC 2, ISO, and CMMC. That's all done through my team.
I understand. I understand. And kind of looking at your career, how did you get into this space?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in security. I started out more on the IT leadership side of the house. So I was the head of IT for a smaller accounting firm, but I was always very interested in security. And I took quite a lot of certifications just to try to learn more about, what was out there and broaden my skill set, and always gravitated towards security certification. So I knew I always wanted to do that. And my firm in 2020, we actually merged in with Baker Tilly. So they had an open position for their CISO, and it was a perfect fit, and it really lined up nicely, and I was able to jump in and do that. So I got in kind of a backhanded way, but nonetheless, very excited to be where I'm at.
Certainly, certainly. Well, cybersecurity in general as a field it seems like it's exploding in kind of popularity, and the spotlight is on. It seems like every other week there is another company raising $1 million at unicorn valuation. I think there is a lot more understanding of just the concept and the implication kind of throughout the organization, really from employees all the way to C-level executives on the board. And I think with everything that's going on with the world, with from work from home to nation state actors and things like this, it's a very important field that's also growing in importance, it seems, every day.
Yeah.
And naturally, a lot of more junior professionals are looking to make a career in the space, or even maybe students who are still in school looking in this space, kind of trying to figure out if it will be a good fit.
Yeah.
From your vantage point, what do you recommend those maybe more junior professionals focus on to be successful?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I think there is sort of this kind of quote unquote sexy idea of what security is from professionals, junior professionals who might think, more along the lines of red teaming, right? Where you're doing penetration testing and, all those types of things. And that's really an extremely small percentage of the security jobs in the market, right? I mean, that is a very niche, group of people that are doing red team assessments, penetration testing, things like that. So I really would recommend folks to take a broader look at what all is out there, right? I mean, the company size that has to have a red team is pretty significant. I mean, for our group, we have 7,000 employees. I have, 12, 15 team members across my area. And so we don't have anybody dedicated to full-time red teaming, right? So to give you an idea of scale, you've got to be a much larger company to have that type of, or you're in a consultancy type environment that provides those services. So I would say step back and think about other avenues. So one that commonly gets overlooked is the GRC, so the governance, risk, and compliance side. I mean, that's where if you're an auditor and you've always had an interest in security, or if you're somebody who, is in IT and you understand policies and procedures, there's a huge field to go into that route. The other thing I would say too is, if you're currently in an environment or you're in a company, but not necessarily in security, or you're in a more junior role, I would offer up to the security leaders where you are, hey, is there anything I can help out with? I'm super interested in security. Where can I get in? And really starting at, the project level. I know here I've hired 3 people from our support team and infrastructure group who expressed interest in security, and we brought them in on small projects, not the most fun projects in the world, but things that they could get their feet wet and say, yeah, this is not my favorite, but I still got it done, and we could see their aptitude to want to bring them in more full time. So I'd say offer up your skill sets, start whatever they might need, whether it's one project, a handful, but just getting your exposure to security. That's what I would offer for junior professionals.
That's a great idea. So essentially offering your time in exchange for experience. And I think it's kind of a low risk experiment on both parts.
Yeah.
This kind of junior professional will get an opportunity to explore what the field is like without committing and without making the jump. And the team gets a resource and potentially a future talent.
Right. I mean, and everybody knows with hiring, it is so hard to hire high level talent right now. It's more attractive to build up, junior level talent into where you need them to be, right? Like I'm making a lot of investments right now internally on more junior and mid-level folks to get them up to that, expert level, subject matter expert place that I need them to be in, versus going out and trying to overpay for somebody or put way too much money into somebody. So yeah, I'd say, get in, and as a hiring manager, it's a dream to have somebody that says, hey, you know what, I'm interested, internally. Might not have every box checked, but it's something you can work with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's also shows internally a career path. I mean, if I were in a position, I think it would be awesome if I can see not just where I am at right now, but a kind of a progression that I can grow and get to the next position. I mean, 2, 3, 5 years. So I think it would be awesome just from the organizational perspective for more junior people to see this progression and see the potential.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Switching gears a little bit, I know there's so many issues that our cybersecurity teams have to deal with right now. I know ransomware comes to mind, cloud security, identity access. Those are kind of some of the topics that seems more top of mind right now. Let's say you had this crystal ball and you can see into the future. 6 months from now, 12 months from now, what do you think top 3 challenges facing CISOs would be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. I mean, I think number one, and it's certainly most relevant right now, but I think all CISOs are getting to a place where your company is having to reckon with the global market. And, I'm speaking, of course, to the Russia-Ukraine scenario. You're, as a CISO, having to understand geopolitically how that could or might impact not only your company, but your client base. And what does that mean for securing, either work that's being done for clients in that part of the world, or if you have employees that are traveling to that part of the world, whatever, it might be. That's making us really think about, okay, how do we think outside the box to get work done, or, make policy recommendations, against certain types of, work from countries or whatever it might be. So I think really that's a challenge, trying to see where does security fit in a company's mindset when it comes to dealing with these geopolitical matters. So that's one. 2, for me, I would have to say, privacy standards are going to be continuing to blow up. I mean, obviously, starting in 2023, next year, California moves from the CCPA to the CCRA. So there's a lot more, privacy regulations that, are going to be coming up with different states. And I wouldn't be surprised if, in a year, maybe 2 years, we see more of a federally mandated privacy regulation. So I think that's going to be a huge challenge coming up. And then lastly, I really see software as a service, the SaaS tools, cloud tools, managing just the sprawl, right? So we all have different tools that we're using in the cloud, but how are we managing SaaS tools from a security perspective? Because most of us are relying on the security practices of the Dropbox.com and Adobe.com, whatever the tool might be. You're kind of relying on the SaaS tools for security, but there becomes a management problem, and with all these different tools in your environment. So I think that's going to be something that's going to crop up more and more. How do we solve that problem of securing things that we don't necessarily own? Is going to be one that comes to mind. So.
I understand. And do you think it's more of on the last point, do you think it's more of an identity and access issue, or more, as you said, managing the sprawl and just managing the entirety of all the tools, cloud tools that you have?
Yeah, it's scary. I mean, I do think it is more the sprawl, but I think what I'm thinking about more of is the data. So if we had the data going in one place, but it's being propagated to 3 other SaaS tools, for example, Salesforce ties into so many different, SaaS offerings. So I've had to literally sit back and start to map out, okay, I know we have an API here, we have an API there, and you start seeing, oh boy, now they're taking entitlements from Salesforce and hopefully bringing them across to all the other, platforms that are connecting in. It just becomes a challenge because a lot of, the folks that are going out and buying those applications aren't necessarily thinking of the ramifications of, data privacy and, retention and, some of those types of things. But to your point, I mean, identity, access management is very critical in that too, right? I mean, if somebody leaves your company, are you sure that you've secured all the access from the cloud tools? I mean, that's a question that not a lot of us can answer with an honest answer, just because we don't necessarily set up all of those accounts.
Makes sense. So in other words, someone leaves, they may still have access to some of the cloud tools, and
absolutely,
as a result, to the data that they really shouldn't.
Yeah,
it makes a lot of sense. Kind of next topic I want to touch on is so Athena. It's kind of meant to be as a community of cybersecurity executives for professional networking, for kind of learning and succeeding together, and we provide curated content and those other things. So, and sometimes we succeed in providing value and with our new initiatives, and sometimes I feel we fall short, and we're always interested in kind of understanding what is that we do that kind of hits the spot and resonates, and what are the things that do not. So from that perspective, where do you find most value out of what we provide, and what do you think, where do you think we can do better or differently?
Yeah, no, it's a great platform. Honestly, I'm very glad to be a part of it. I think the most value that I have, the weekly emails are great. One, to kind of see what's going on out there in the space, whether it's, new potential career opportunities, not only for, myself, but obviously other CISOs that I know, security executives, but also to see, who's going where, right? You might know a notable CISO just moved to a new company. That's very beneficial to know. And also the LinkedIn, I love these interviews. I've actually seen a couple myself, so I really appreciate that content when it's posted on LinkedIn. I do think it would be nice to see, as far as what I think, you could do better. I would like to see some roundtables or maybe some more, interactions with the other group members, not necessarily just on LinkedIn, but maybe some sort of virtual experience. That would be very unique, and maybe at some point, depending on the size and what makes sense, something in person would be kind of cool, just to get around other security leaders, because truthfully there's not a whole lot of opportunities to have roundtables where you're not constantly being sold something else, right? But to be there where it's just that group and we're talking about things that matter to us. So that's just a couple ideas.
Certainly. And the roundtable, are you thinking more a roundtable around a certain topic? Let's say managing cloud sprawl, or I know identity and access, and just kind of sharing insights about a certain topic? Or is it more kind of meet and greet, my strong suit, my superpower is this, I have a challenge in that, and see if there is a match of kind of someone's superpower would match someone's problem, and kind of asking and providing feedback in real time, but more free form. Which one do you think would make more sense?
Yeah, I kind of like the first idea, but a little bit of a twist. I'm thinking more about if you crowdsource from the CISOs, hey, what are some questions that you with other CISOs, and everybody in the network can say, hey, you know what, I really want to know about X, Y, Z. What are other CISOs doing, or what's your stance on this? And then, being able to pull one or two or three of those topics, depending, how in depth people would get on them, and then having a roundtable where, hey, you know what, these are the questions. Do we have anybody who is, has a great answer for this, and what are you doing? So I think something like that. But you know what, honestly, your second idea there, I think is great as well, right? The meet and greet and solving real-time problems, because sometimes there are, pressing issues that we really don't have anywhere else to turn, because you can't necessarily talk to your CEO or your board about it because it might be too technical, and you're trying to find a way to balance that, or maybe it is a problem with your board and you're trying to figure out how to approach that. And there's other people on the network that have boards and done that sort of report, or solved that problem. I think that would be beneficial too. So I think both would be great.
Mm-hmm. I understand. And then, do you think it would make sense to do this by industry? In other words, would you see the most valuable feedback coming from CISOs in the same professional services, for example, space, or do you think it matters less, and kind of experience in general would be just as relevant?
Yeah. I mean, I could see both sides of the coin, right? Because I've certainly been on conversations where you have, CISOs that are in, for example, manufacturing, that I don't quite resonate how their security program is run, because again, I'm securing something different with professional services. But at the same time, there are sometimes, creative ways to solve problems that people might do in another industry that traditionally hasn't been thought of to be done in your industry. But yeah, I mean, I do think it would make sense though to have breakouts to where you could have, financial services, companies talking to each other, manufacturing, or so on and so forth. That way there are more of a targeted, we know similar softwares, we know similar challenges. So I think I like the more segregated and more, industry focused approach.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned both kind of virtual and live, and it's something that we're definitely planning on doing going forward as we're coming out of those COVID restrictions. And it's kind of a little bit of on the fence, because people have different sensitivity about gathering in any sort of numbers.
Yeah.
On the one hand, on the other hand, they're saying, "Oh, there's this Zoom fatigue is real. We can't wait to kind of meet and greet face-to-face kind of format." So from your perspective, are you open to both? Which one do you think would be more relevant?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great point. I mean, we're seeing that, of course, there's some people who just don't want to get on an airplane, ever again, or if they can avoid it. So I get that travel. I mean, to me, I think you'll get the most engagement doing virtual, because you're going to have, the convenience factor of just being able to hop on at home. Obviously, you'd be able to cover more ground too, right? Because then it wouldn't be tied to a time zone. You could say, hey, we're doing it at noon Eastern, right? Which is still 10 a.m., or 9 a.m. Pacific time. But honestly, maybe it's once a year. Maybe it's once a year for the in-person, like a summit, we all converge in one, let's go to Denver, right? Halfway for everybody type of a thing. Might make sense, because there is something about shaking people's hands, talking to them face to face, being able to kind of let your guard down a little bit and talk about the things that are going on. I think there's value in that, because, I mean, I'm sure you'd resonate with this, but for me, the older I get, the more I know that the saying of it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? And being able to have that network, that resource, be able to call them, hey, you know what? We were talking about this, at the event, this came up. What do you think? Being able to expand the network.
Well, it's I like the definition. How would you define term friend? And for me, it's how fast they return my calls. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I was actually, well, on that point, I mean, we're certainly thinking about different formats, but where we would like to start is actually not attempt like a large scale, all hands on deck event, but more local, I know, a dinner for a dozen of people or something like this. So there's no travel involved, and it's not a kind of a large scale production, and it's not a large group event, but more of a kind of a local dinner. And I think it would be a great way to kind of bridge some of those issues and provide a venue for people to connect. And maybe there'll be some overlap, someone you already know, but probably there'll be some new faces as well. Is it something that would kind of make sense, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know there, Gartner does something similar, or Avanta, they do something similar. So I know that works for sure. There's definitely groups that do that. So I like that approach. I think part of the problem, becomes, obviously finding that many CISOs in that area, right? So I mean, I'm in San Diego. I'm sure there's a number, in the network that are here, but there might be some challenges if you're in Phoenix, for example, or you know what I mean. So that might be, but I like that approach too, right? It's personal, because the less number you have in one spot, the more people can actually interact and talk, and it's not,
Yeah,
30 of us are sitting in the back and there's 5 people having a conversation. You're only talking to the people on your left and right.
absolutely, absolutely. And then I mean, we'll experience the RSA and Black Hat and some of those Gartner events that are just, it's hard to manage. I mean, last time I was on RSA was 45,000 people in 2020. So it's
yeah way too many. Yeah,
certainly. Well, and you mentioned, it's interesting that you mentioned that it would be awesome to be part of a roundtable and not being sold to. So kind of on this topic, kind of dealing with vendors, in one of our mastermind calls, we talked to Athena members who are CISOs, and they're very emotional and almost visceral reaction when this topic was breached, and someone said, my phone is on do not disturb from Monday morning until Friday. Another person said, I only respond to internal Slack messages. I just, email doesn't exist for me anymore. So obviously it's there's kind of a lot of pressure from the kind of the vendor community. So from your experience, if you think back, 6 months, maybe a year, and you think of a vendor that kind of, it was an amazing experience from kind of start to finish. What, without naming names, what is it that they did that you thought was interesting? And on the flip side, what are the couple things that you would that you hate the most that salespeople sometimes do?
Yeah. Well, so one, I'll just start with the things I hate, because it happens all the time. But adding me on LinkedIn and then just sending me your pitch in the message is terrible. And it's even worse when you try to add me and you say, oh, looks like we're in the same industry. I'd love to connect and learn from you, blah, blah, blah. And then the very next message a day or two later is, here's what we do, book a time on my calendar, 15 minutes your time, and so anyway, that, the fire hose of, I don't know why they still do that, because they must have some success, but not anybody I know. So for sure, I would tell them, cut that out. I think what works, I've actually had a couple that, it's about building a relationship, right? So, for example, I have a vendor who we purchased a competitor product, and they knew this. And I told them, look, I'm locked in for 3 years. I just signed this, a couple months ago. And they said, sure, no problem. I'd just love to, be able to connect and see how it's going and, maintain a relationship. So I meet with this guy quarterly, and we just talk. It's 30 minutes, and, it could be about, personal life. It could be about how the project's going, but it's just that building that relationship, because he knows that in 2.5 years, when that contract gets up, I'll be able to say, you know what, well, let's have a real conversation, because we've been talking this whole time. And gosh, the rep that I bought this product from, I haven't talked to since the minute I signed on the dotted line, right? So they have an advantage of this relationship building. And then I think an easy one is interact with the CISOs, interact with us on LinkedIn. If we're posting stuff, comment on it, ask questions. Most of us are more than open and happy to respond to questions. Just, you got to stay, there's a fine line there, right? You don't want to go in there and say, oh, well, my company could solve your problem, that you're posting about, right? But just having that, just taking the sales hat off for a second and going, connecting with the person. I think that's the best way to do it. Because again, when we actually have a need, we will damn sure pick up the phone and call the person that we know to help us solve that problem, For
sure. And it's interesting that you say this. It seems like people are so so transactional, and so they don't have the patience to play the long game, which is where it's all at. It seems like, we're not machines, we're humans. We're looking for a connection and something that's genuine rather than
absolutely
transactional. That's very, very interesting, and thank you for sharing this. Where do you usually go, for example, if there is a new emerging problem, new threat vector, or something kind of new that is just a new problem, where do you usually go for information? Is it your peer network? Is it LinkedIn? Is it media publications? Is it analysts like Gartner and maybe I don't know Forrester how strong they are, but what's your kind of go-to source to learn about a new kind of cybersecurity theme?
Yeah. Honestly, LinkedIn is a great place. There's a lot of great content there. Another one that's kind of surprised me more, and this really took off more so during COVID, was webinars. I love attending webinars because one, I could do it, during a lunch hour, or I could do it, while I'm doing something else, but able to listen in. I don't have to actively participate, but still, understand what's going on. So yeah, I think the webinars is great because again, that's more of it gives us the opportunity as CISOs to say, yes, I will attend that, versus, somebody jamming my inbox saying, hey, you know what, I could fix that problem for you. Let me tell you more about it. And then, I think so LinkedIn is great. People post stuff. So expanding the network, and that's what's great about having this network, right? Is we can see if somebody's posting something, it does, hashtag Athena, and we know, okay, great. That's somebody that's also a CISO. Here's what they're talking about. That's relevant. That's meaningful for sure. So I do think that there's a lot of potential there for the network to be kind of that source of, what we're seeing, what we're talking about.
Certainly. Interesting. Last question. For some reason this year, RSA and Gartner are happening or scheduled at the same time, early June. Is it for you? I may have asked the question already, but for you, is it RSA? Is it Gartner? Is it neither?
Yeah, what's funny? I'm almost going to say neither right now. I mean, my firm typically in years past was an RSA. Would go to RSA, but now it's just it's tough. I'm not a huge Gartner fan. I mean, Gartner and Forrester have some quality information, but the price point of what you're paying to get that information is usually very, very steep. So I'm not a huge fan. But as far as conferences go, I'm actually more of a fan of the ISACA conferences. But if I had to pick between the two, I would take RSA. So
it's not that far from San Diego. It's closer.
Yeah, exactly.
Right from San Diego than Maryland for Gartner. Awesome. Yeah. Nick, thank you so much for your time. This was lots of fun, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Same here. I had a ton of fun. Appreciate it. Thanks, Misha.